hidden feelings. The chatter of friends filled the small apartment, blending with the soft clink of glasses and the faint notes of jazz coming from a speaker on the shelf. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, one hand resting on his knee, the other clutching a half-empty soda can. The conversations and laughter swirling around him felt like white noise, distant and unimportant. His eyes, however, were fixed on Rachel. She stood by the bookshelf, her fingers lightly tracing the spines of novels she probably wasn't even reading. The dim light cast a warm glow over her wavy brown hair, and her soft laughter floated across the room. She was perfect, effortlessly so, and every little thing she did made Ethan's chest tighten. He knew he shouldn't look at her this way, not when she was his best friend, but he couldn't help it. He wasn't the only one watching her. Tyler, standing just a few feet away, had leaned against the wall, his confident posture and easy smile a stark contrast to Ethan's awkward slouch. Tyler's voice carried above the hum of the room as he told some story about his recent trip out west. The way Rachel laughed, tilting her head back slightly, made it clear she was enthralled. Ethan clenched his jaw, his soda can crumpled slightly under the pressure of his grip. He hated this, hated the way Tyler could command a room with just a few words, hated the way Rachel's eyes sparkled when she looked at him. Most of all, he hated himself for being too much of a coward to say anything. The first time Ethan met Rachel was in college. She'd sat next to him in Intro to Psychology, scribbling furiously in a notebook while the professor droned on. She'd borrowed his pen, then his notes, and finally his time, roping him into late-night study sessions that quickly turned into long talks about life, dreams, and everything in between. Over the years, their bond had only grown stronger, but so had Ethan's feelings. She'd leaned on him through heartbreaks and triumphs alike, like the time she'd broken up with her long-term boyfriend and showed up at Ethan's door in tears, or the day she got her first big promotion and dragged him out to celebrate with burgers and fries. Those moments were etched into his mind, but they were always accompanied by the same refrain. "You're such a good friend, Ethan. I don't know what I'd do without you." He wanted to be more than her rock, her safety net. But every time he thought about telling her, the fear of ruining what they had kept him silent. Tyler was a wild card, an easygoing charmer who joined their group only recently. He had this natural charisma, the kind that made people gravitate toward him. Ethan had tried to brush off his presence at first, but over time, it became impossible to ignore the way Rachel lit up whenever Tyler was around. Tonight was no exception. Tyler had Rachel's full attention as he recounted some story about getting lost in the woods during his hiking trip. And then, out of nowhere, "This raccoon just lunges at me," Tyler said, his hands miming the attack. "I swear, I've never run so fast in my life." Rachel burst into laughter, her hand brushing against Tyler's arm as she steadied herself. "I can't believe you, Tyler. Only you would turn getting lost into an action movie." Ethan forced a laugh along with the others, but inside, he was unraveling. He wanted to be the one making Rachel laugh like that. The gentle sound of rain tapping against the window filled the room, a subtle rhythm that mirrored Rachel's racing thoughts. She sat curled up on the couch, her knees tucked beneath her, staring at her phone. The screen was blank, no new messages or missed calls. She bit her lip, resisting the urge to send another text to Tyler. They hadn't spoken much all week. His replies to her messages were curt, his excuses for not meeting up vague and repetitive. "Work is crazy right now," he'd say, his tone clipped, like he couldn't wait to get off the phone. Rachel had tried to be understanding, but the silence between them had started to feel like a wall, one she couldn't seem to break through. The faint knock at her door startled her. She glanced up, her heart lifting slightly. For a brief moment, she thought it might be Tyler. But when she opened the door, Ethan stood on the other side, holding a small bag of pastries and wearing his usual easygoing smile. "I figured you hadn't eaten yet," Ethan said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He placed the bag on the coffee table, his eyes flicking to her face. "What's wrong?" Rachel forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Nothing. I'm fine." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're a terrible liar, Rachel." Ethan's words hung in the air as Rachel sighed and sank back onto the couch. She stared at her hands, the weight of her emotions pressing down on her. "It's Tyler," she admitted softly. "I don't know what's going on with him. He's been so distant lately." Ethan sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Have you talked to him about it?" "I've tried," Rachel said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But every time I bring it up, he just says he's busy or tired. It's like he's not even trying anymore." Ethan watched her carefully, his chest tightening at the sight of her pain. He'd always hated seeing Rachel upset, but hearing her talk about Tyler like this was unbearable. "You deserve better than that," he said finally. His voice was quiet but firm, each word carrying the weight of his unspoken feelings. "If he's not giving you the attention you need, that's on him, not you." Rachel looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you really think so?" Ethan nodded. "Absolutely. You're amazing, Rachel. Anyone would be lucky to have you." The room fell silent, the sound of the rain growing louder in the background. Rachel felt her cheeks flush slightly at Ethan's words. She reached for one of the pastries, more to give her hands something to do than out of hunger. The following day, Rachel tried to call Tyler during her lunch break, hoping for a moment of connection. The phone rang several times before he finally answered. "Hey," he said, his tone flat. "Hi," Rachel said, her voice bright despite her growing frustration. "I just wanted to see how your day's going." "Busy," Tyler replied. "I've got back-to-back meetings all afternoon." Rachel hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her desk. "Tyler, is everything okay between us?" There was a pause, just long enough to make her heart sink. "Of course," he said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "I'm just stressed, Rachel. Can we talk about this later?" "Sure," Rachel said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Later." But deep down, she knew that later would never come. That evening, Rachel found herself knocking on Ethan's door. She wasn't sure why she'd come. Maybe she just needed to be around someone who actually cared. Ethan opened the door almost immediately, his surprise quickly turning into concern. "Rachel, what's going on?" "I didn't want to be alone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped aside, letting her in. He led her to the couch, where they sat side by side. Rachel let out a shaky breath, her emotions threatening to spill over. "Tyler barely talks to me anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm losing him, and I don't even know why." Ethan listened intently, his heart breaking for her. He wanted to reach out, to hold her, to tell her she didn't need Tyler or anyone else to make her feel whole. But he knew it wasn't his place, not yet. "You're not alone," he said softly. "I'm here for you, Rachel. Always." Rachel turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted to lighter topics. Rachel laughed for the first time in days, the sound filling Ethan's apartment like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. At one point, She reached for her glass of water, her hand brushing against Ethan's. The touch was brief but electric, sending a jolt through both of them. Rachel froze, her breath catching as she looked up at him. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't look away from her, couldn't ignore the way her eyes seemed to soften, the way the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. "Rachel," he began, his voice barely audible. Rachel stood abruptly, her cheeks flushed. "I should go," she said, avoiding Ethan's gaze. Ethan stood as well, his chest tight with a mix of longing and regret. "Rachel." "Good night, Ethan," she said quickly, grabbing her bag and heading for the door. Ethan watched her leave, his mind racing. The touch had been brief, but it had changed everything, and as he closed the door behind her, he couldn't help but wonder if she'd felt it too. Meanwhile, outside, Rachel leaned against the wall of the hallway, her hand pressed to her chest. Her heart was racing, her thoughts a tangled mess. She couldn't deny it anymore. There was something between her and Ethan, something she couldn't ignore. The cafe was busy, the late afternoon sun streaming through the large windows as baristas moved back and forth behind the counter. Ethan sat in a corner booth, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Across from him, Mary stirred her tea absent-mindedly, her eyes fixed on Ethan with concern. "You've been staring at that same spot for 5 minutes, Mary said, breaking the silence. "What's going on, Ethan?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. His thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, memories, and unspoken words. Finally he exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "It's Rachel," he said softly. Mary frowned. "What about her?" Ethan hesitated, his chest tightening. He'd kept this secret for so long, burying it under layers of denial and fear. But now, with everything happening between Rachel and Tyler, it felt like it might consume him if he didn't say something. "I'm in love with her," he admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've been in love with her for years." Mary's spoon clattered against her saucer. She stared at Ethan, her expression a mix of surprise and sympathy. "Ethan." Ethan shook his head, his voice trembling. "I can't do this anymore, Mary. Watching her with Tyler, it's killing me. He doesn't appreciate her the way I do. He doesn't know her the way I do." Mary leaned forward, her tone cautious. "And you think confessing your feelings will fix that?" Ethan flinched at her words, guilt washing over him. "I don't know. Maybe. What if she feels the same way? What if I'm missing my chance?" Mary's gaze softened. "Ethan, you're playing with fire. Rachel values your friendship. If you tell her how you feel, it could change everything and not necessarily for the better." Ethan clenched his fists, his frustration bubbling over. "So, what am I supposed to do? Just sit back and watch while she builds a life with someone else?" Mary hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes loving someone means putting their happiness above your own. Are you ready to risk losing her entirely?" Meanwhile, Rachel and Tyler were at his apartment, the remnants of dinner spread across the table. Tyler leaned back in his chair, his expression tense. "You've been distracted lately," he said, his tone casual but probing. Rachel looked up from her plate, frowning. "Distracted? How?" Tyler shrugged, trying to mask the edge in his voice. "You spend a lot of time with Ethan, more than with me sometimes." Rachel sighed, pushing her plate aside. "Ethan is my friend, Tyler. You know that." "Do I?" Tyler's voice sharpened, his insecurities slipping through. Because sometimes, it feels like there's more going on than you're admitting. Rachel's eyes narrowed. What are you trying to say? Tyler leaned forward, his gaze piercing. I'm saying, are you sure there's nothing between you and Ethan? Back at the cafe, Ethan and Mary's conversation grew more intense. Mary pressed him, her voice firm but kind. Ethan, if you really care about Rachel, you need to think about her, not just your feelings. If she's happy with Tyler, do you want to be the one who ruins that? Ethan's jaw tightened, his heart aching. What if she's not happy? What if she's settling because she thinks that's what she's supposed to do? Mary sighed, reaching across the table to place a hand on his. You need to be sure, Ethan. Sure that this is about her happiness, not just your own. Ethan nodded, though his mind remained conflicted. He knew Mary was right, but the thought of staying silent felt unbearable. After Tyler's confrontation, Rachel sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. She replayed the conversation in her mind, her emotions swirling. Tyler's words had struck a nerve, forcing her to confront feelings she'd tried to ignore. She thought about Ethan, his steady presence, his quiet support. He'd always been there for her in ways Tyler hadn't. But did that mean there was something more between them? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Ethan. Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to say. Rachel stared at the message, her heart racing. At the same time, Tyler's words echoed in her mind. Are you sure there's nothing between you and Ethan? The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Rachel's apartment, but the light didn't ease the weight in her chest. She sat at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Tyler's ultimatum from the night before replayed in her mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. Distance yourself from Ethan, or we're done. Her phone buzzed beside her, the screen lighting up with Ethan's name. Her chest tightened. She wanted to respond, to tell him everything that had happened, but she didn't know how. She had always turned to Ethan in moments of doubt, but this time, he was part of the problem. Across town, Ethan stared at the same message he'd sent her hours ago, still unanswered. Can we talk today? He tossed his phone onto the couch, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Rachel's silence gnawed at him. He felt trapped, like he was losing her to Tyler, and there was nothing he could do about it. Tyler sat in his car outside his office, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He couldn't shake the image of Rachel and Ethan laughing together, the way she seemed to relax around him in a way she didn't with Tyler. It wasn't just friendship, he was sure of it. At work, Tyler's colleagues noticed his distracted demeanor. You okay, man? One of them asked during a meeting. Tyler waved them off, but inside, his thoughts churned. He began scrolling through Rachel's social media during breaks, looking for any hint of Ethan in her posts. Each photo, each comment from Ethan felt like a dagger. That evening, Tyler confronted Rachel again. I need to know, Rachel, he said, his voice low but intense. Are you really committed to us? Because it doesn't feel that way. Rachel bristled. Tyler, this isn't about my commitment. This is about your insecurities. Ethan is my friend, and that's all he's ever been. Then prove it, Tyler shot back. Stop seeing him so much. It's me or him, Rachel. You can't have both. After Tyler left, Rachel sank onto the couch, tears welling in her eyes. She hated feeling trapped, like she was being forced to choose between two people who meant so much to her. Her thoughts drifted to Ethan, his easy smile, the way he always knew exactly what to say to make her feel better. But then she thought of Tyler, of all the moments they'd shared, the future they'd started to build together. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her messages. Ethan's name stared back at her. She wanted to call him, to hear his voice, but she couldn't. Not now. Ethan sat on the steps outside his apartment building, the cool evening air doing little to calm his nerves. Mary joined him, handing him a bottle of water. "You look like you're about to explode," she said, sitting beside him. Ethan sighed, taking a sip of the water. "Tyler's got her wrapped around his finger. She won't even respond to me now." Mary raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe she's just trying to figure things out. You don't know what's going on in her head, Ethan." "I know Tyler doesn't deserve her," Ethan said bitterly. "He's insecure, controlling. He's pushing her into a corner." Mary frowned. "And you think stepping in will help? You'll just make things worse." Ethan looked at her, his frustration boiling over. "So what? I'm supposed to sit here and do nothing while she gets hurt?" "You're supposed to let her make her own choices," Mary said firmly. "If you care about her, you'll trust her to figure it out." Over the next few days, Tyler's jealousy became more obvious. He started calling Rachel more frequently, questioning her whereabouts and who she was with. Rachel grew increasingly frustrated, feeling like she was being suffocated. During a lunch break, Rachel met up with Ethan, needing a moment of clarity. They sat on a bench in the park, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells with Tyler," Rachel admitted, her voice heavy. Ethan clenched his fists, his anger toward Tyler barely contained. "Rachel, you deserve better than this. You deserve someone who trusts you." Rachel looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "It's not that simple, Ethan. Relationships aren't black and white. Maybe they should be," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "You shouldn't have to choose between being happy and being loyal." That evening, Tyler showed up unannounced at Rachel's apartment. His expression was serious, his body tense. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Rachel crossed her arms, bracing herself for another argument. "What now?" "I can't keep doing this," Tyler said, his voice trembling slightly. "You need to decide, Rachel. It's me or Ethan. You can't have us both." Rachel stared at him, her heart pounding. She felt cornered, like the walls were closing in around her. "Tyler, this isn't fair." "No," Tyler interrupted. "What's not fair is me feeling like I'm competing with another man for your attention. I need an answer, Rachel. Now." Rachel's lips parted, but no words came out. The weight of Tyler's ultimatum pressed down on her, leaving her frozen. Tyler paced the aisle of the jewelry store, his mind racing as he examined the rows of engagement rings. The fluorescent lights glinted off the glass cases, each sparkling diamond feeling like a plea for resolution. Tyler's heart pounded as he tried to drown out the nagging doubts in his mind. This will fix everything, he thought. If Rachel said yes, it would cement their future together, erase the insecurities gnawing at him. The thought of her smile, the joy in her eyes when he proposed, it was the anchor he clung to as he handed his credit card to the jeweler. As Tyler left the store, the small black box in his pocket felt heavier than it should. He wanted this moment to be perfect, but a part of him wondered if it was coming from the right place. Meanwhile, Rachel was at her apartment, scrolling through her phone aimlessly. Her conversation with Tyler played on repeat in her head. His ultimatum had left her feeling boxed in, but the thought of losing him completely terrified her. She sighed, setting her phone down. The tension between her loyalty to Tyler and the undeniable bond she shared with Ethan felt like a weight pressing on her chest. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, his expression hesitant. "Hey," he said softly, holding up a bag of takeout. "I figured you hadn't eaten yet." Rachel stepped aside, letting him in. She wasn't sure if this was a good idea, but being around Ethan always seemed to calm her nerves. They sat together on the couch, the containers of food spread out on the coffee table. Ethan tried to lighten the mood with small talk, but Rachel's distant expression didn't go unnoticed. "You seem distracted," he said finally, setting his fork down. "Is everything okay?" Rachel hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window. "Tyler's been difficult lately." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to press her for details, to tell her she deserved better, but he knew he had to tread carefully. "How so?" "He's just insecure," Rachel admitted. "He thinks there's more going on between us than there is." Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his voice steady. "And what do you think?" Rachel met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I don't know. I feel like I'm being pulled in two different directions." The silence that followed was heavy, but Ethan didn't push further. He could see how much she was struggling, and he didn't want to make things harder for her. The next evening, Tyler arrived at Rachel's apartment with flowers in one hand and the small black box in the other. His palms were clammy, his heart racing as he rehearsed the words in his head. Rachel opened the door, surprised to see him. "Tyler, what's all this?" "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. She stepped aside, and Tyler set the flowers on the counter before turning to face her. He took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket for the box. "Rachel, I know things have been tense between us lately," he began. "But I love you, and I want us to move forward. I want to build a life with you." He got down on one knee, opening the box to reveal the ring. "Will you marry me?" Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to tilt as she stared at the ring, her mind racing. This was what she'd always wanted, or so she thought. But as she looked at Tyler, doubt crept in. She loved him, didn't she? So why did this moment feel so wrong? "Yes," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler's face broke into a relieved smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He pulled her into a hug, but Rachel's arms felt heavy as she wrapped them around him. Across town, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of him. His thoughts were a jumble of memories, feelings, and unspoken words. He didn't know how else to get through to Rachel, how else to make her see how much she meant to him. He picked up his pen and began to write, pouring his heart onto the page. He wrote about the moment he realized he loved her, the way her laughter felt like sunshine breaking through clouds, the way he couldn't imagine his life without her. By the time he finished, the paper was filled with raw, unfiltered emotion. He folded it carefully, sliding it into an envelope. That night, Rachel sat alone in her apartment, staring at the ring on her finger. It sparkled in the dim light, a symbol of commitment, of certainty. But all she felt was a hollow ache in her chest. She thought about Tyler's proposal, about the way he'd looked at her with such hope. Then she thought about Ethan's quiet strength, his unwavering presence. The contrast between them was stark, and it left her feeling more confused than ever. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you." Rachel's heart pounded as she read the message. She knew she shouldn't see him, not now. But a part of her needed to. Ethan placed the letter on the edge of his desk, staring at it for a long moment before standing and walking away. In her apartment, Rachel picked up her phone, her finger hovering over Ethan's name. She knew this conversation could change everything, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what that meant. Rachel's apartment was eerily quiet as she sat on her couch, staring at the engagement ring on her finger. The delicate band caught the sunlight streaming through the window, its sparkle mocking the storm brewing in her chest. She turned it slowly, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Tyler had given her certainty, stability, or so she thought, but the memory of Ethan's message lingered in the back of her mind, refusing to let her rest. "Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you." The text had seemed innocent enough, but Rachel knew better. There was a weight to Ethan's words, an urgency she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting her out of her thoughts. She grabbed it quickly, her heart sinking when she saw the notification. It wasn't Ethan. Across town, Ethan paced his small apartment, the letter sitting on the edge of his desk like a silent witness. He had rewritten it twice already, trying to balance honesty with hope. The final version was raw and unfiltered, his feelings spilling onto the page in a way he hadn't allowed himself to express before. He picked it up, running his fingers over the envelope. His chest was tight, his breath shallow, but he was resolute. Rachel needed to know how he felt, no matter the consequences. Mary's voice echoed in his mind from their earlier conversation. "Are you sure you're ready for what happens next?" He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. The next morning, Ethan left the letter on Rachel's doorstep. He didn't knock. He couldn't bring himself to face her. Instead, he walked away, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. When Rachel opened her door and saw the envelope, her brow furrowed. She picked it up slowly, her fingers trembling as she recognized Ethan's handwriting on the front. She hesitated, standing in the doorway for what felt like an eternity before retreating inside. Sitting down on the couch, she unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words. The further she read, the tighter her chest grew. Ethan had poured his heart onto the page, laying bare feelings he'd kept hidden for years. He wrote about the first time he realized he loved her, about the countless moments he wished he could tell her, about how seeing her with Tyler had been both a blessing and a curse. Tears blurred her vision as she finished the letter. She clutched it tightly, her mind racing. When Ethan showed up later that afternoon, Rachel was waiting for him. She opened the door before he could knock, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. He froze, unsure of how to read her expression. "Did you—" "I read it," she interrupted, holding up the letter. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Because I was scared, Rachel. Scared of losing you. Scared of ruining what we have." Rachel swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "And now? Now I know I can't keep pretending," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I love you, Rachel. I've loved you for years, and I know it's complicated, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." The room felt impossibly small, the silence stretching between them. Rachel turned away, her hand pressed to her forehead as she tried to process everything. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tyler proposed to me, Ethan. I said yes." Ethan felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. He opened his mouth to speak but closed it again, unsure of what to say. "Do you love him?" he asked quietly. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought I did, but now I'm not sure of anything." Ethan took a step closer, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Rachel, I don't want to make this harder for you, but I needed you to know how I feel. I needed you to know there's another choice." Unbeknownst to them, Tyler had arrived outside Rachel's apartment. He was planning to surprise her with dinner, hoping to celebrate their engagement. But as he reached the door, he froze, hearing Ethan's voice from inside. "Rachel, I don't care how messy this gets. I'll wait for you. I'll fight for you." Tyler's blood ran cold. He stepped back, his hands clenched into fists. The words stung more than he wanted to admit, each one chipping away at the fragile foundation of their relationship. When Rachel opened the door a moment later, she gasped, finding Tyler standing there. His face was a mask of anger and betrayal. "How long has this been going on?" Tyler demanded, his voice low but dangerous. "It's not what you think," Rachel began, her voice shaking. Tyler laughed bitterly. "Not what I think. I just heard him say he'd fight for you, Rachel. What am I supposed to think?" Ethan stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "Tyler, this isn't about you." "No," Tyler snapped, cutting him off. "It's about Rachel making a choice, and clearly she already has." Tyler stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Rachel stood frozen, her heart pounding as Ethan reached out to steady her. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. But she pulled away, her tears falling freely now. "I don't know what to do, Ethan. I don't know how to fix this." Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, the early morning light streaming through the curtains. Her phone rested on the nightstand, its screen dark, but her gaze remained fixed on it, as if willing it to provide answers. Tyler's words from the night before echoed in her mind. It's about Rachel making a choice, and clearly, she already has. The confrontation had left her reeling, her emotions scattered like shattered glass. She had tried to piece them together in the silence of the night, but no matter how she arranged them, the picture didn't make sense. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She hesitated before standing and crossing the room. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, his expression filled with concern. "Rachel," he began softly, his voice almost a whisper. She stepped aside, letting him in. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, the tension palpable. Ethan didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, his hands shoved into his pockets as if trying to contain his emotions. "I'm sorry for last night," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." Rachel shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's not your fault, Ethan. None of this is your fault." Ethan took a deep breath, his next words deliberate. "I meant what I said, Rachel. I'll love you, even if you never choose me. Even if you go back to Tyler and build a life with him, I'll still love you." His words were like a balm and a wound all at once. Rachel felt her chest tighten, her tears spilling over as she looked at him. "Why do you have to make this so hard?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because it's the truth," Ethan replied. "And you deserve the truth, Rachel." Later that day, Rachel sat in the living room, staring at the engagement ring still on her finger. She turned it slowly, the weight of it feeling heavier than ever. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Tyler's name on the screen. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Rachel." Tyler's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension. "I need to see you. There's something I didn't tell you." Rachel's brow furrowed. "Tyler, I don't think—" "Please," he interrupted, his tone almost pleading. "Just hear me out. I'll come to you." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Rachel stared at the phone, her mind racing. What could Tyler possibly have to say that he hadn't already? Ethan sat on the steps outside his apartment, the cool breeze brushing against his skin. Mary joined him, handing him a coffee without saying a word. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said finally, breaking the silence. Ethan chuckled dryly. "Feels like it." Mary studied him for a moment before speaking again. "So, what's your plan? You going to sit here and mope, or are you going to fight for her?" "I already did," Ethan said, his tone resigned. "And now it's up to her. I can't force her to choose me." Mary sighed, leaning back against the railing. "You're too good for your own good, Ethan." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of losing her." When Tyler arrived at Rachel's apartment, he looked exhausted. His usual confidence was replaced with a kind of vulnerability Rachel hadn't seen before. "Thanks for letting me come," he said, stepping inside. Rachel folded her arms, her guard still up. "What did you want to tell me?" Tyler hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened." Rachel raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I know I haven't been fair to you," Tyler admitted. "I've been jealous, controlling. I let my insecurities get the better of me." Rachel blinked, taken aback by his candor. "I know I pushed you into saying yes to the proposal," Tyler continued. "And I know that wasn't fair to you either. I didn't want to lose you." Rachel's heart ached at his words, but she didn't respond. She needed to hear the rest. Tyler took a deep breath, his next words halting. "There's something else I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Rachel's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "I cheated on you," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit Rachel like a punch to the gut. She staggered back, her hand flying to her chest as she tried to process what he'd just said. "It was a mistake," Tyler added quickly. "It happened once, early on, before things got serious. I didn't know how to tell you, and then I didn't want to lose you." Rachel stared at him, her mind racing. She felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and an odd sense of clarity. For the first time in days, Rachel felt like the fog in her mind was lifting. She looked at Tyler, her voice steady. "Thank you for telling me the truth, but I can't do this anymore." Tyler's face fell. "Rachel, please." "I deserve more," she interrupted, her tone firm. "I deserve trust, honesty, and someone who doesn't make me feel like I have to choose between them and the people I care about." Tyler nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. He didn't argue. Deep down, he knew she was right. That evening, Rachel found herself standing outside Ethan's apartment. She knocked softly, her heart pounding as she waited. When Ethan opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise. "Rachel?" She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his. The choice. The quiet hum of the city at dawn seeped into Rachel's apartment. She sat at her kitchen table, the engagement ring resting in front of her like a silent witness. Her fingers traced the delicate band, the cool metal sending shivers through her skin. Last night's call from Tyler echoed in her mind. "I need to tell you something." The weight of everything pressed down on her. Tyler's insecurities, Ethan's patience, her own indecision. She had spent so much time trying to hold things together that she hadn't stopped to ask herself what she really wanted. And now, it was too late to avoid the truth. Her phone buzzed on the counter, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was Mary. "Hey," Rachel said, answering quickly. "Morning, Rach." Mary's voice was warm, but there was a slight edge of concern. "How are you holding up?" Rachel let out a humorless laugh. "Not great. Tyler wants to talk. Ethan sent me another text. I feel like I'm standing in the middle of a tornado." Mary chuckled softly. "Sounds about right. But maybe it's time to stop standing in the storm and start walking out of it." Rachel met Tyler at a small cafe downtown later that morning. The familiar smell of coffee and pastries filled the air, but she couldn't find comfort in it. Tyler was already seated at a table near the window, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "Rachel," he said as she approached, standing briefly before sitting back down. "Tyler," she replied, her tone cautious. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them thick with tension. Finally, Tyler sighed, breaking the stillness. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his voice low. "About everything that's happened." Rachel folded her hands in her lap, bracing herself. Tyler's fingers tightened around his mug. "I told you the truth about the mistake I made. But there's something else I haven't said. Something I didn't even realize until now." Rachel's breath hitched. "What is it?" Tyler hesitated, his gaze fixed on the table. "I think I've been holding on to you, not because it's what we both need, but because I'm scared of being alone. And that's not fair to you." Rachel blinked, her chest tightening. She hadn't expected this level of honesty, and it left her feeling both relieved and heartbroken. "I do love you," Tyler said, finally meeting her eyes. "But I've been selfish. I see that now. And maybe it's time I let you go." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she reached across the table, placing a hand over his. "Thank you, Tyler, for being honest. I think we both need to let go." Later that afternoon, Rachel met Mary at her apartment, seeking solace and clarity. Mary greeted her with open arms and a hot cup of tea, ushering her to the couch like a protective older sister. "So," Mary began, settling beside her. "How'd it go with Tyler?" Rachel sighed, her fingers tightening around the mug. "We ended it. For good this time." Mary nodded, her expression both sympathetic and proud. "And how do you feel?" "Relieved, I think," Rachel admitted. "But also, lost. I've spent so much time trying to make everyone else happy. I don't even know what I want anymore." Mary placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to feel that way. But you have to ask yourself, what does your heart want, Rachel? Not your head, not your fears, your heart." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. I think I know. I'm just scared it's too late. Mary smiled. If it's Ethan, I can guarantee it's not too late. That man would wait for you forever. While Rachel wrestled with her decision, Ethan was at home, pacing his small apartment. He had reread Rachel's last message so many times, the words felt burned into his mind. Can we meet? I need to talk to you. Mary had been his sounding board for weeks, but now he was alone with his thoughts. Doubt crept in, gnawing at him. What if Rachel had chosen Tyler? What if confessing his feelings had ruined everything? He sat down at his desk, staring at the empty envelope he had used to deliver his letter. Tyler, sitting at a bar with a bittersweet smile. He raises his glass to himself, a quiet gesture of acceptance and growth as he prepares to start anew. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to hope. Rachel asked Ethan to meet her at their favorite spot in the park, beneath the sprawling oak tree they had sat under so many times before. The air was crisp, the golden hues of autumn leaves swirling around them. When Ethan arrived, his heart raced at the sight of Rachel sitting on the bench, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of nerves and determination. Hey, Ethan said softly, taking a seat beside her. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes glistening. I ended things with Tyler. Ethan froze, his breath catching. You did? Rachel nodded, her voice steady. It wasn't right. For him or for me. And I realized, I've been running from my feelings for a long time, but I can't anymore. She reached out, taking Ethan's hand in hers. It's always been you, Ethan. I was just too scared to see it. Ethan's chest swelled with emotion as he gazed at her. Rachel. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that felt like an ending. Finally, we see Rachel and Ethan walking through the park, their hands intertwined as they laugh and talk. The weight of their past struggles feels lighter now, replaced by hope for the future. Sometimes, we have to let go of what we thought was right to find what truly matters. Love isn't always easy, but when it's real, it's worth every risk.